Hi there and welcome to another episode of Money Moves with Debt Rescue. This week we are going to be focusing on some savings tips. It's Savings Month in South Africa in the month of July, so we decided it's a good time to spend a bit of time while we're working on moving our money in the right direction, how we can save in any of our living expenses or just the way we run our lives daily. Our first tip is looking at subscriptions. Go to your bank statement and have a look at any possible subscriptions you might have that come off monthly for items you no longer use. The first one that comes to mind maybe is the gym contract that we entered into at the beginning of the year, where we had all these great New Year's resolutions, but now there just isn't the time or no longer needed. If you are able to, look at the possibility of cancelling those contracts. And look at any others. Maybe you at one point had some streaming contracts for TV or music or something, and you're no longer using them. Every little bit counts, so if you no longer use it, look at cancelling it. Our second tip is, if you have to go to the doctor or the pharmacy when it comes to medication that's either prescribed or over the counter, that you ask about generic medicines. Obviously, before you make any decisions, consult your healthcare practitioner to find out if you can substitute them, but a lot of times it's a viable option and they usually are significantly cheaper. So always remember to ask if you can and look at the price differences there. The third tip is ditch the brands. A lot of times when we buy items, whether it be clothing, shoes, or even our groceries, we tend to look at the brands that we know, and more often than not, a few months later, new brands come out and we only focus on the older ones because obviously we've become accustomed to them and we know that they work. But many of the alternative brands are just as good, sometimes even better, and it's definitely worth looking at alternative brands that could be cheaper and in the long run definitely save you on your expenses. Our next tip is looking at how you can save some costs on electricity. Obviously we're in winter, so now more than ever, some of our appliances are running a lot harder to generate their power that they need, and that means more electricity usage. So the first thing we're going to recommend is look at your lighting. Look at the globes and bulbs that you use in your lighting equipment and possibly change them over to the lower electricity consuming ones. They might be a little bit more expensive in the short term, but in the long term you'll definitely be saving because they also generally have a longer life. When it comes to your geyser, it's a good thing to look at investing in a proper geyser blanket to keep your geyser covered. Obviously make sure that you're buying the correct product, but by doing this you cover up your geyser, which means that the outside temperature, which then drops significantly in winter, does not affect your geyser where the temperature drops there and then has to keep reheating. Another item to look at is making sure that if your appliances are not in use, that you unplug them. Anything that is plugged in, especially if it's switched on and there are lights blinking, is using some form of electricity. Again, every little bit counts, so unplug them and make sure that they're not in use. And then finally, when it comes to electricity usage, if you're making a cup of coffee and it's only a cup of coffee for a single person, don't fill your kettle up to the top because it takes much longer to boil, which means it's using more electricity. Just fill it up so that it's enough for that single cup that you want. Our next tip involves the cost of transport or fuel. As we know, in the past year, the fuel prices increased by more than 40% year on year. So it now makes up a significant chunk of our monthly budget. So tip number one, if you can, try and work from home, or alternatively try and carpool when you go to work to try and keep those costs down. Next thing that we'd strongly recommend is, if you're doing your shopping, try and keep it to once a week. Reason being is you don't want to have to go out of your way 2 or 3 times a week to go to the shops to go and top up on items. And if you are going grocery shopping, for example, on a weekend, go with a few friends, carpool, share the transport costs there as well. Our sixth tip involves shopping. We've just spoken about how we can save some money on the transport when we go to shopping, but when it comes to the actual shopping, very easy tip is to start with our community papers. They are crammed with all the specials weekly so that we can do our shopping at home. So pack those papers out on the table, go through, check the items that you intend on purchasing and where you can get them cheapest. But remember, don't end up in a situation where you're shopping in 4 different shops and you have to drive across town and then all your savings are lost in the cost of fuel. Our 7th tip is stick to the plan. Any plan you are making when it comes to saving, whether it be your shopping plan or your savings plan, make sure that you stick to it. Keeping this at the forefront of all of your planning before you're going shopping or before you start spending money is going to take some willpower, but that willpower is going to be the thing that helps you save that money, and at the end of the day you're going to look back to the fact that you are proud of the savings that you have managed to gather. Tip number 8 is social saving. Obviously, when you're trying to save money, you're trying to avoid going to places that cost unnecessary funds, but this doesn't mean you can't go out and still have a good time. It's just important that you plan here. Instead of maybe going out to a restaurant or to dinner with friends, have them over or go over to their place and let everybody contribute and share in the items that makes part of the dinner or the get-together. This way, it's still social, it's still fun, but it costs us significantly less. Our ninth tip involves being a little bit industrious, and this is to cook and freeze. Maybe over the weekend when you're at home, do some planning, start preparing some of your meals for the week, cook some of them that you already can, put them in the freezer, that during the week it's a lot easier, that when you need to just take them out of the freezer in the morning and heat them up in the evening, it saves you time, but it'll also save you money because it's very easy to get home, be very tired, not want to cook and end up maybe doing some takeouts and then possibly spending money that you hadn't planned on. Our final tip is pay yourself first. Now what we mean by this is when you've done that budget and you've worked out how much you can save every month, the moment your salary is paid into your bank account, make sure that you take that amount that you allocated to your savings and transfer it into that separate bank account where you can save it. The longer you leave that money in your bank account, the more tempted you might become to possibly spend it. So pay yourself first, transfer that money out into your other bank account. Thank you for joining us in this week's episode of Money Moves with Debt Rescue, and we hope you could use some, if not all, of these tips. If you have some great tips, please have a look in the comments below where you can access our Digimag. In there, we're running a competition currently where you can win 250 Rand if you send us some interesting tips on how you can save some money. Please remember to like this video, share it, and please leave your comments on any topics you'd like us to cover in the future.